So another way to think about how we determine which product, a bottle of wine or a pound of cheese uh, or good X or good Y, the country is going to produce, given those relative prices and those marginal rates of transformation, is to use what are called ISO value lines. Okay, so an ISO value line, if we break this word up, ISO is a Greek word or a Greek root for same, right? So what it is a series of lines that all correspond, or along which, a series of lines along which all points have the same dollar value. Okay, so what we're talking about is all points along a line that have the exact same dollar value. Okay, so let's define value as V. Okay, so we're going to say the total value of all the cheese and all the wine is equal to V. And the way we would determine this, right, is we'd say, okay, the total value must be equal to the price of cheese times the amount of cheese produced. So this will give us the total value of the cheese that is produced, and we're going to add the price of wine times the amount of wine that was produced. Okay, so the total value of the country's production of cheese and wine is equal to the total value of the cheese produced plus the total value of the wine that was produced. Okay, and so what this is going to show us is all points along which this line here are equally valuable. Now we can rearrange this equation to give us a more familiar equation for a line. Okay, so let's pretend that we're going to put wine on the y-axis and cheese on the x-axis. Okay, so what we would want to do is solve this equation for QW, because then we get into a familiar form of a line of y equals mx plus b, where b is the y-intercept, right, and m is the slope. Okay, so we want to get this here to look like this. Okay, so we solve for QW. So let's subtract PCQC from both sides. V minus PC times QC is equal to PW times QW. We'll divide both sides by PW. Okay, and that will give us V over PW minus PC over PW times QC is equal to QW. Okay, so what we have is our B. So B is this number here. So we can call it here V over PW. And the slope is this negative PC over PW. Okay, and that will give us this right here, right? So slope equals negative PC over PW. Okay, and that says that on any point on this line, V is going to be exactly the same. Okay, so if we reduce V, right, if V were to be smaller, right, it would just shift it down here, but it would not alter the slope, right? Notice that the slope is determined by the relative price. And if V were to increase, right, then we would move it up here. I'm going to put a break in it so I don't draw over some words, right? But it should go all the way through. Okay, if V were higher, so if we produced more value, then it'd be up here. Okay, And so this is the basic idea of an ISO value curve. Now we should note that it's impossible for two of these lines to cross, right? They cannot ever cross ever, because what that would be saying, right? Let's say that this ISO value line corresponds to $500, and this one corresponds to $1,000, and this corresponds to $1,500, right? So if we were to plug these numbers in, or plug in our old values of the prices and everything, right? We could say that V equals 2 times the amount of cheese plus the price of wine was 10, so the amount of wine that was produced. Okay, so we could get these different numbers here by plugging different numbers into QC and QW. Okay, so let's pick the $1,000. So if we picked the $1,000, we can get that with a combination of 500 units of cheese and 0 units of wine. That would get, oh, I'm sorry, this should be 1,000. Okay, so 1,000 equals 2 times 500 plus 10 times 0. Okay, we can get it with 0 times 100 bottles of wine. Right, that would give us 1,000. And we could get it with, let's say, how about 250? Right, so that gets us a total value of 500, and this would be 50. Right, so all these combinations would be different points along the line. Right, so this would be, let's call this point A. Right, that would be this here. We can call this point B. That would be this point here. And somewhere right around here would be point C. And that would be this one, right? So A, B, and C, point A, point B, and point C, all have the same value here, which is why they're on the same line over here. And if we were to change this to 1,500, then we can change these numbers to work out to be 1,500, and we'd be on points on this line. And we could change it to be 500, and we'd be on this line. Okay, so the point is that all points along this line have to have the same value, the same $1,000 or $500 or $1,500, and that it's impossible for these lines to cross. Okay, so at some level, we can think of these lines as similar to a contour line on an elevation map, right? So if you've ever seen a map of like a mountain range or anything like that, they'll have, lines around them that correspond to differing elevations, right? So maybe this is, 500 feet, this is 1,000 feet, and this is 1,500 feet, right? All points on this line are 1,500 feet above sea level. All points on this line here are 1,000 feet above sea level, and all points along this line are 500 feet above sea level. This is the same kind of thing. All points on this line are $500. All points on this line are $1,000, and all points on this line are $1,500. And just like these contour lines cannot ever cross, same thing here, right? You cannot be 500 feet above sea level and 1,000 feet above sea level at the same time, just like you cannot have something that's worth $1,500 and $1,000. It can't be done, okay? So now the question becomes, how do we relate these things to our PPF curve to figure out what's going on? Okay, so let's start off and suppose that we have two goods, and I'm going to switch to just X and Y because it's easier to think about them in those terms. Okay, and we have a PPF curve, straight line. Okay, and we will put in, let's call these ISO value lines. We'll put in some ISO value lines here. Okay, and let's say that they look like this. Okay, so this is one ISO value line, so I'll call it V1. And we have another ISO value line here, which I will call V2, and we have another ISO value line here, which we can call V3, and just for good measure, I'll put in a fourth one, and I'll extend out that x-axis for us so that this becomes consistent, V4, okay? Now remember that as we move further and further away from this origin point, right, as we move further away on the ISO value lines, we're producing more value, okay? So the question becomes, which one should we produce? Should we produce X or should we produce Y? And the goal is to maximize value. Okay, so if we produced here, which is on our PPF curve, right, we would be on V1, right? But can we do better than that? Well, it turns out we can. Right, so we could produce some combination of goods X and Y, X1, Y1, and that would be on our PPF curve, so it's possible for us to do it, and it would produce V1, okay? We could also, instead, move to this point here and produce X2, Y2, okay? And we would have more value created, so we produce a little bit less X and some more Y, and we would create more value for ourselves, okay? Or we could even produce right here at Y3, where all we're making is Y. So we're only producing whatever good Y is, we're just producing that. And notice how that point there gets us on the highest possible ISO value line that we can possibly be on, right? We would love to get out to I4 here, or V4 here, right? This fourth ISO value curve, but we can't because we can only produce on this black PPF curve. Okay, so given our PPF, given our productive capabilities, the best we can do is here. Now, it's important to note that the slope of this line, right, is going to be, well, let's solve for it, right? Remember, V is equal to the price of X times the quantity of X plus the price of Y times the quantity of Y, okay? And so let's solve this in terms of QY, just like we did with, where'd it go? Well, I guess it's here. Oh, no, yeah, just like we did here, right? In fact, we've already done it. So QY, all right, let's go through it again, all right, is going to be equal to, well, PQY, we know that, is going to be equal to V minus PX QX, and so QY is going to be equal to V over PY minus PX over P, what? That's a P, all times QX. Okay, so we know the slope, right? The slope is the relative price. Okay, so the slope of the ISO value lines is equal to the relative price of, where'd it go, X in terms of Y. Okay. So we have a relative price, and remember, what's important is that we can sell Y for X. Okay, so once we have our product Y, we can then sell it for X, and we can sell it along this V3 line. Okay, so by producing Y3, it enables us to consume anywhere along this line here. Okay, So we can now we can start our production here and then consume anywhere along this line, okay? And notice that all points on this line are further away from the origin than our PPF curve is. So what it says is that if we specialize in producing Y, we can then consume beyond or more than we could produce on our own. So we could perfectly consume here, which is beyond what we could do by ourselves. So this would be illustrating, I'll use blue, right? These would be gains from trade, right? They allow us to consume more things than we can produce from on our own, okay?